The world of Mexican cartels is a dark underworld of violence and terrorism, a place where lawlessness rules and brutality knows no limits. These criminal organizations, mainly engaged in drug trafficking, are known not just for their illegal activities, but also for their horrific methods of maintaining control and spreading fear. The cartel's rule of terror extends beyond ordinary violence. It involves unimaginable acts of torture and cruelty designed to send a chilling message to their enemies and anyone who dares to oppose them. In this horrific exploration, we look into some of the most terrible torture methods employed by Mexican cartels. Face peeling. Known by the nickname desollado, face peeling is one of the most horrifying forms of torture employed by Mexican cartels. This horrific practice involves the slow and painful removal of the victim's facial skin, often while they are still alive. The process, designed to cause maximum pain and suffering, is a cruel warning to others. The bizarre act doesn't end with the victim's death. The peeled face is sometimes preserved and displayed publicly, serving as a vulgar symbol of the cartel's violent dominance. Famously, the Sinaloa cartel, one of the most powerful and ruthless cartels in Mexico, has employed this method. Witnesses, including family members or rival gang members, are left with haunting images that underscore the cartel's ability for cruelty. Victims of this torture not only go through immense physical suffering, but also leave a lasting psychological scar on anyone who witnesses it. The act of face peeling, with its mix of physical harm and psychological terror, shows the extreme measures these criminal organizations will take to spread fear and maintain control. Dismemberment. Dismemberment is one of the most horrifying methods of torture and execution used by Mexican cartels. This horrific practice involves cutting the victim into pieces, often while they are still alive, to guarantee maximum pain and psychological terror. Cartels often use dismemberment as a public display, leaving the remains in recognizable places or sending them to the victim's family or rivals. This cruel display serves multiple purposes. It eliminates enemies, spreads fear, and strengthens the cartel's dominance. The psychological impact of discovering dismembered remains is serious, causing deep trauma and establishing a universal sense of fear and helplessness within communities. One of the most chilling instances of dismemberment involved a 6-year-old girl. In a horrific demonstration of power, a cartel brutally dismembered the young child in front of her parents. The parents were forced to watch in powerless horror, and their suffering increased because of the complete powerlessness of the situation. This murderous act exemplifies the cartel's complete disregard for human life and their willingness to commit unimaginable cruelty to maintain their grip on power. Waterboarding. Waterboarding is a terrifying form of torture that replicates the fear of drowning. The victim is strapped to a board, their face covered with a cloth. Water is then poured over the cloth, making it hard to breathe. This causes the victim to feel as though they are suffocating, leading to extreme panic and fear. The psychological and physical trauma of waterboarding is huge. Victims often feel like they are moments away from death, which can lead to long-lasting psychological scars. The method is designed to break the victim's will, making them more likely to give up information or comply with demands. Unlike other forms of physical torture that leave visible marks, waterboarding leaves no physical scars, making it a preferred method for interrogators who want to avoid leaving evidence. However, the lack of visible injuries does not reduce the suffering endured by the victim. The repeated sense of drowning can lead to severe psychological disorders, including post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, anxiety, and depression. Waterboarding is not just a method of physical torture, it is also a form of mental suffering. Beheading. Beheading is a common execution method among cartels, but using a chainsaw adds a terrifying layer of brutality. This method is designed to be as painful and horrifying as possible. The victim, often tied and helpless, faces the roaring chainsaw, a tool meant for cutting trees, but now a weapon of horrific execution. The noise of the chainsaw alone can cause deep fear, even before the actual beheading begins. Victims are frequently filmed during the process, and these gruesome videos are circulated widely to create fear. The sight and sound of a chainsaw beheading are meant to horrify not just the immediate witnesses, but also those who see the footage later. The chainsaw's raw power ensures a quick but brutal decapitation, often causing a scene too horrific for most to imagine. The purpose behind this barbaric method is clear: to intimidate rival gangs and the public, showcasing the cartel's ruthless dominance. The stew, known as el guiso, or the stew, this method is one of the most horrifying torture techniques used by Mexican cartels. In this gruesome practice, victims are placed into large drums or barrels filled with highly acidic substances like acid, gasoline, or industrial chemicals. The idea is to burn or dissolve the victim alive, ensuring a slow, painful death. The process begins by locking up the victim, often binding their hands and feet to prevent any chance of escape. Once secured, they are lowered into the barrel of acidic liquid. The substance starts to eat away at their flesh almost immediately, causing unimaginable pain. This method is particularly favored because it leaves little to no trace of the victim's remains, effectively destroying any evidence of the crime. The absolute horror of el guiso exists not only in the physical suffering it causes, but also in its psychological fear. Victims are fully aware of their fate as the acidic liquid slowly dissolves their bodies. This method serves as a terrifying reminder of the cartel's ruthless ability for violence and their willingness to go to extreme lengths to eliminate threats and send a chilling message to others. Feeding to lions and tigers. Unbelievably, some cartel victims end up as live food for tigers and lions. These majestic but deadly creatures are often kept by cartel leaders as symbols of power and respect, showing off their wealth and untouchable status. The act of feeding a human to these predators is both a display of control and a horrifying demonstration. Imagine the scene: a caged lion or tiger sprinting with stored energy and a helpless victim pushed into the cage. The victim's screams fill the air as the hungry predator approaches. The sight of a person being torn apart by these powerful animals is both horrific and terrifying. It's a public execution method designed to send a clear and chilling message to anyone who might consider opposing the cartel. This method underscores the cartel's brutal creativity and their willingness to use any means necessary to assert their dominance. By using such a savage method, they ensure that their reputation for cruelty and absolute power spreads far and wide. The psychological impact on witnesses is serious, leading to deep fear and obedience. Feeding victims to lions and tigers is not just a method of execution. It's a terrifying display meant to showcase the cartel's control and ruthless nature. Electrocution. Electrocution isn't just a method of torture. It's a weapon of terror, designed to break both body and spirit. Picture this: a victim bound to a cold metal frame, surrounded by intimidating people hidden in shadows. With wires acting as instruments of pain, the air buzzes with nervousness as the torturers operate them. With a flick of a switch, electricity courses through the victim's body, burning flesh and tingling nerves. It's a pain beyond words, a fire raging within as every muscle vibrates in protest. But the suffering doesn't end there. Each shock becomes a countdown to the next, a cruel cycle of suffering that plays on the mind like a bizarre piece of music. Mexican cartels are masters of psychological warfare, using electrocution not just to hurt, but to generate fear. They know that the fear of the unknown, the fear of the next shock, can be as horrifying as the pain itself. And so they create these scenes of horror with terrifying accuracy, leaving their victims scarred in body and soul. Electrocution is not only a tool in the dark world of cartels, it is a cruel reminder of who is in charge and who is in control. And for those unfortunate enough to find themselves at the mercy of these ruthless organizations, it's a nightmare from which there may be no coming out.